The alien noble Horus spat as he shook hands with the killer human who would protect the helpless alien princess from an assassin who'd sent every other species running. Jake Rice stepped off his human interstellar enforcement agency, IEA shuttle, onto the Hazari homeworld of Zarus Prime. The IEA had dispatched him, one of their most effective and hardened human mercenaries, to assist the Hazari, a proud leonine alien species known for their honor, with protecting Princess Aria, the sole heir to their throne, from an unknown assassin who'd already made 3 brazen attempts on her life. The human enforcer was met in the palace courtyard by Horus, the towering 7-foot-tall, golden-furred Hazari captain of the guard. The alien captain's amber eyes dripped with disdain at having to rely on a dishonorable human, but with the mysterious assassin sending extraterrestrial security forces fleeing, the humans were the Hazari's last hope. The hardened human merc smirked. "Don't worry, kitty cat. This is what us killer humans do best, taking out the trash when all you aliens tuck tail between your legs." Horus snarled and was about to admonish the insolent human when a deafening explosion rocked the palace. Emergency alarms wailed. The pair sprinted toward the princess's quarters, only to find her gone, abducted, with the assassin's taunting symbol gouged into her bed frame. Jake's tactical mind raced as he scanned the scene, realizing the stakes were even higher than he thought. The Hazari Empire's fate and the princess's life hung in the balance. He'd make damn sure these aliens didn't regret calling on the killer humans as a last resort. The human IEA enforcer turned to the distressed Hazari captain. "Round up what security you have left. We're going hunting. By the time I'm done, this assassin will wish he never set foot in Hazari space." Without wasting a moment, Jake radioed his IEA contacts, calling in every favor he could to assemble an elite search team. Horus, still seething from the human's insolence, begrudgingly followed his lead. As they combed the palace grounds, the tension between them was palpable. "Your methods are reckless and dishonorable," Horus growled, his fur bristling. "This is not how a Hazari warrior conducts a search." Jake, his focus laser-sharp on finding the princess, brushed off the captain's barbs. "Honor doesn't mean shit if we don't find her alive. Now shut up and let me work." The human activated his wrist-mounted scanner, a cutting-edge device that could detect hidden passages and energy signatures. The device pinged, revealing a concealed tunnel entrance beneath a statue in the courtyard. They descended into the dank, dimly lit passageway, weapons at the ready. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, where they found themselves face to face with a heavily armed contingent of Hazari rebels. At their center stood a cloaked figure, his face obscured by a mask bearing the assassin's symbol. "The shadow, I presume?" Jake called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Jake's mind raced, assessing the dire situation. They were outnumbered and outgunned, the rebels wielding advanced plasma rifles that made the human's trusty blaster look like a pea shooter. Horus tensed beside him, ready to charge, but Jake subtly signaled him to wait. The human's gaze darted around the chamber, spotting a weak point in the tunnel's support structure. With lightning speed, he drew a cluster of micro-grenades from his belt and hurled them at the ceiling. "Duck and cover, kitty cat." The explosives detonated in a cacophony of sound and fury, sending rock and debris raining down. In the ensuing chaos, Jake grabbed Horus by the scruff and dragged him toward a side passage, where they found the princess bound and gagged. As they raced back to the surface with the rescued royal in tow, Jake's mind whirred with the implications of what they'd just witnessed. The rebels were far too well equipped to be acting alone. "There's a traitor in your court," he told Horus bluntly as they emerged into the palace. "Someone high up is feeding them intel and resources." The captain's eyes flashed with anger and disbelief. "Impossible. No Hazari would betray the Empire. I'll investigate this myself." But Jake knew they didn't have that luxury. Every moment wasted was another chance for the assassin to strike again. The human had a hunch, a lead on the killer's identity that he needed to follow up on, even if it meant going solo. As Horus stormed off to conduct his own inquiries, Jake slipped away into the bustling streets of the capital city. The trail led him to the seedy underbelly of HFY society, a world of black market deals and hidden agendas. What he uncovered there would shake the foundations of the empire itself. A web of corruption, spun by those in the highest echelons of power, all connected to the mysterious shadow. The true scope of the conspiracy made Jake's blood run cold. He had to get this information back to Horus and the princess before it was too late. But as he turned to leave the dingy back-alley data broker's den, Jake found himself staring down the barrels of a dozen plasma rifles, held by some very angry-looking HFY rebels. The human cursed under his breath, his hand inching toward his blaster. Looks like this was going to get messy. Jake burst through the swinging saloon doors into a thick haze of sweet smoke. His eyes adjusted, scanning the dimly lit bar of scaly aliens until they fell on a small, twitchy HFY slouched at the counter, nursing a glowing blue cocktail. Jake slid into the seat next to him, signaling the bartender. "Rack's been looking for you." The diminutive alien nearly choked on his drink. His bulbous eyes darted to Jake. "Shit, you're that human merc. I don't want no trouble, man." "Relax." Jake dropped a handful of credits on the bar. "Just here to chat about your rebel pals, named the Assassins." Rack scratched his snout, eyeing the money. He leaned in close, his voice a raspy whisper. "Look, you didn't hear it from me, but word is, the Assassin's a human. Goes by the Ghost. Real spook, that one." "That's the juicy bit." Rax polished off his drink. "My sources say—" The bar doors crashed open. A pack of armed HFY thugs stormed in, energy rifles raised. The human merc drew his blaster in a blur. Time seemed to slow as he vaulted over the counter, squeezing off shots with preternatural speed and precision. 2 thugs dropped, smoking holes in their chests. Jake dove for cover behind an overturned table as the remaining goons returned fire. Splinters exploded around him. The army crawled to the edge, peeking out to snap off a few more shots. Another thug crumpled. Rax cowered behind the bar, hands over his head. Jake cursed. So much for his lead. With a roar, the last thug charged, firing wildly. Jake rolled, narrowly dodging the barrage. He came up in a crouch, blaster leveled. The 2 fired simultaneously. The thug's bolt singed Jake's shoulder. Jake's aim was true. The HFY dropped like a sack of bricks. Rax's body lay crumpled behind the bar, caught in the crossfire. Jake grimaced. Another dead end. He holstered his blaster and stalked out into the neon-lit night, mind racing. A human assassin. A conspiracy in the HFY court. He had to get back to Horus. At the palace, Horus paced like a caged animal, a data pad clutched in his claws. The evidence was damning. Zephyr, his own brother, was the traitor. Rage and sorrow warred within him. The door to Zephyr's chambers burst open. The towering HFY Minister of Defense stood tall, his golden fur gleaming. Horus brandished the data pad. "Explain this, brother. You've been funneling weapons and intel to the rebels. You betrayed our people." Zephyr's face twisted into a sneer. "The Empire has grown soft, weak. It's time for new leadership, and I will provide it." With a roar, Horus lunged, claws extended. Zephyr met him head-on, fangs bared. They clashed in a whirlwind of fur and fury, a lifetime of rivalry and resentment fueling every blow. Claws raked flesh. Blood splattered the marble floor. The brothers fought with the savagery of beasts, HFY martial arts honed to deadly perfection. In the palace halls, Jake sprinted toward the sound of combat. A dark figure stepped from the shadows to block his path, a face he knew all too well. "You," Jake snarled. The ghost smirked. "Long time, Jake, let's dance." The 2 humans collided in a brutal ballet of strikes and counters, evenly matched in skill and determination. They battled through the corridors, smashing priceless artifacts, leaving a trail of destruction. In Zephyr's chambers, Horus stumbled back, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Zephyr pressed the advantage, hissing in triumph. Horus roared, a final surge of strength. He caught Zephyr's arm, twisted. Bones snapped. Zephyr howled. Horus slammed his brother to the ground, claws at his throat. Zephyr went limp, defeated. Jake and the ghost tumbled into the room, locked in combat. Jake caught a glimpse of Horus standing over Zephyr's prone form, then pain exploded in his skull as the ghost cracked him with an elbow. A plasma bolt sizzled past Jake's ear, striking the ghost square in the chest. He crumpled, smoke curling from the wound. Jake turned. Princess Arya stood in the doorway. A royal guard's sidearm raised, her amber eyes alight with cold fire. Princess Arya holstered her smoking blaster, her amber eyes locked on Jake and Horus. The Shadow Cartel. They're behind this rebellion, manipulating my people for their own twisted gains. Jake wiped the blood from his split lip, ignoring the throbbing in his skull. The Shadow Cartel, never heard of them. Arya's tail lashed. A powerful crime syndicate operating in the shadows. They've been destabilizing the Hazari Empire, using the rebels as pawns. Horus growled, his wounds still raw. And you knew about this, why didn't you tell us? Jake barked a laugh. Well, color me impressed, Princess, you've got guts. Arya's gaze hardened. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my people, even if it means allying with a human. Jake smirked. Looks like we're in this together then, so what's the play? We take the fight to them, Arya declared. The cartel's headquarters are on Nox, a lawless planet on the fringes of Hazari space. We infiltrate, gather evidence, and expose their treachery. The trio prepared for their mission, Jake calling in favors to secure a stealthy transport to Nox. Horus, still recovering, donned his battle armor with a grimace. Arya, a fire burning in her eyes, armed herself to the teeth. As their ship descended through Nox's polluted atmosphere, Jake turned to his unlikely allies. Remember, we're walking into the lion's den. Watch each other's backs, and we might just make it out alive. Jake, drawing on his underworld contacts, led them to a seedy bar nestled in the city's rotting heart. The patrons, a motley assortment of hardened criminals and mercs, eyed the trio with predatory interest. Jake flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Danger's my middle name. Now you gonna talk, or do I need to get persuasive? The Cragger swallowed, his eyes darting to Horus's looming presence. Dante, the cartel's boss. He's holed up in the old factory district. You didn't hear it from me. In the factory district, the trio crept through shadows, the air thick with the stench of chemicals and fear. They breached the cartel's compound, alarms shrieking, and all hell broke loose. Dante's thugs swarmed like angry hornets, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Jake and Horus fell into a deadly rhythm, the human's blaster and the Hazari's claws working in tandem to cut a path through the cartel's defenses. Arya, a whirlwind of fangs and fury, proved her mettle, her Hazari strength and agility more than a match for Dante's goons. She tore through their ranks, a golden blur, leaving broken bodies in her wake. In the heart of the compound they found Dante, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. Jake Rice, the IEA's loyal dog, or should I say, their obedient monkey. Jake leveled his blaster at the crime lord. Dante, should have known a scumbag like you would be behind this. What's the angle? Why destabilize the Hazari? Dante laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. Oh, Jake, so naive. The Hazari are just the beginning. With the IEA's backing, the Shadow Cartel will bring the galaxy to its knees. A new era of human dominance is dawning. Rage, white-hot and all-consuming, surged through Jake's veins. He lunged at Dante, blaster forgotten, fists flying. The two humans clashed in a brutal ballet of violence, trading bone-crushing blows. Dante fought with the savagery of a cornered beast, his augmented strength fueled by desperation. But Jake, driven by a righteous fury, matched him blow for blow. They danced a deadly waltz, smashing through the compound's walls, leaving destruction in their wake. The compound shook as Jake and Dante traded savage blows, smashing through walls and equipment. Sparks flew from ruptured power conduits. Alarms shrieked. Horus and Arya battled their way through the chaos, a whirlwind of claws and plasma fire. Dante's thugs fell before their onslaught, but more kept coming, an endless tide of hardened killers. A deafening explosion ripped through the building, throwing them to the ground. Ears ringing, Jake staggered to his feet, shaking debris from his hair. Through the smoke and dust, he saw a squad of heavily armed IEA agents storming in, led by a grizzled, battle-scarred man he recognized all too well, Colonel Marcus. "Marcus, listen to me," Jake shouted over the din of gunfire. "Dante's been playing you. This whole operation is a setup." Marcus sneered, leveling his rifle at Jake's chest. "The only setup here is you, Rice. You and your alien pals are under arrest for treason against the IEA." Jake dove for cover as Marcus opened fire, energy bolts sizzling past his head. He rolled, snatching a fallen thug's plasma rifle, and returned fire, forcing Marcus and his goons to scatter. Across the room, Horace grappled with a trio of IEA agents, his massive frame dwarfing them. He roared, fangs bared, as he hurled them aside like ragdolls. But more kept coming, piling on, bearing him down by sheer numbers. A plasma bolt caught Horace in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, blood seeping through his golden fur. "Horace!" Arya leapt to his side, her claws making short work of his attackers. She pressed a hand to his wound, her face tight with concern. "Hold still, let me see." Horace growled, pushing himself upright. "I'll live, we have to get to Jake." Jake, locked in a brutal melee with Marcus, caught a glimpse of Dante slinking away through the smoke, making a break for it. "Arya! Stop him!" The princess moved like lightning, a golden blur streaking across the battlefield. She caught Dante at the door, a high kick sending his gun skittering away. The crime lord snarled, lashing out with a cybernetic fist, but Arya was too fast. She ducked, spun, her claws raking across Dante's face. He reeled back, blood splattering the floor. Jake and Marcus circled each other, trading bone-crunching blows. Marcus was good, as fast and strong as any IEA super soldier, but Jake was better. He hammered away at the colonel's defenses, forcing him back, waiting for an opening. "There!" Jake lunged, a devastating uppercut snapping Marcus's head back. The colonel crumpled out cold before he hit the floor. "Jake, look out!" Horace's warning shout came a split second too late. Marcus, not as finished as he'd seemed, surged to his feet, a wicked-looking plasma pistol in his hand. The muzzle flashed. Time seemed to slow. Jake saw the bolt lancing towards him, too fast to dodge. He braced for impact, for the searing pain and oblivion. But it never came. A massive golden form hurled itself into the line of fire. Horace jerked as the bolt struck him square in the chest, a spray of blood misting the air. He crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, a shocked gasp escaping his lips. "No!" Jake was at Horace's side in an instant, cradling the fallen Hazari in his arms. Crimson stained Horace's fur, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You stupid, brave bastard," Jake choked out, his vision blurring. "Why'd you do that?" Horace coughed, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. "Because that's what comrades do, brothers in arms." Jake shook his head fiercely, refusing to accept what his eyes were telling him. "Don't you dare die on me, kitty cat, you hear me? That's an order." Horace's lips twitched in a faint smile. His hand found Jake's, claws scraping weakly against the human's palm. "Been an honor. Jake Rice. Finish this. For the Empire. For us." The light faded from Horace's amber eyes. His body went limp, a final breath rattling from his lungs. Jake howled, a wordless, primal sound of grief and rage. He clutched Horace to his chest, rocking back and forth, hot tears streaking through the dust and blood on his face. Arya knelt beside him, her own eyes glistening. She placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder, her voice thick with sorrow. "He was a true warrior, Jake. A hero. We won't let his sacrifice be in vain." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He laid Horace down with infinite care, crossing the fallen captain's arms over his chest. He stood, fists clenched, a cold, implacable resolve settling over him like a shroud. "No, we won't. Dante, Marcus, the Shadow Cartel, the IEA traitors. They're all going to pay, every last one of them." Jake gathered Horace's limp form in his arms, the Hazari's blood soaking through his shirt. His mind raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins. They had to move fast. "The med facility," Jake grunted, struggling to lift Horace's bulk. "Saw it on the way in. It's our only shot." Arya was at his side in an instant, shouldering some of Horus's weight. Her face was grim, determined. "Lead the way." They staggered through the war-torn streets of Nox, Horus's laboured breathing echoing in Jake's ears. The acrid stench of smoke and blood filled the air. Jake's muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed on, fueled by sheer force of will. A shout rang out behind them. Jake cursed. Dante's thugs out for revenge. He glanced at Arya, saw the steel in her eyes. "Keep moving," he growled. "I'll handle this." Jake lowered Horus to the ground, whirling to face the approaching goons. They came at him in a rush, a motley crew of humans and aliens, armed to the teeth. Jake met them head-on, his fists and feet a blur of motion. He ducked a wild swing, drove his knee into a thug's gut. Bone crunched under his knuckles as he laid out another with a vicious right hook. A third came at him with a knife, slashing wildly. Jake caught his wrist, snapped it like a twig. The thug howled, the knife clattering to the ground. Behind him, Arya crouched over Horus, her claws bared, ready to defend her fallen captain. But Jake was a one-man army, a whirlwind of violence and skill. In moments the thugs lay groaning and unconscious at his feet. Jake scooped up Horus once more, ignoring the burn in his arms. "Let's move." The med facility loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They burst through the doors, startling the Hazari staff inside. "Please," Arya gasped, her voice raw with emotion. "He needs help." Jake slumped into a chair in the waiting room, his head in his hands. Horus's blood caked his skin, his clothes. He was dimly aware of Arya pacing nearby, her tail lashing in agitation. The minutes crawled by, each one an eternity. Jake's mind raced, replaying the battle, the guilt gnawing at his gut. If only he'd been faster, stronger. If only... The doors opened. A doctor emerged, his fur matted with sweat. Jake leapt to his feet, heart in his throat. "He's stable," the doctor said, his voice weary. "But he has a long road ahead. He'll need time to heal." The relief hit Jake like a physical blow. He sagged, tears pricking at his eyes. "Thank you, Doc, thank you." He raced outside, scanning the streets. No sign of her. His communicator beeped, a message flashing on the screen. "Jake, I'm sorry for leaving without a word," Arya's voice rang out, tinny through the speaker. "But I have to return to Zaris Prime. I must confront my father about the corruption in our court. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget what you did for Horus. For me." Jake's jaw clenched. Like hell she was going alone. He spotted a sleek Hazari fighter parked nearby, ripe for the taking. He was in the cockpit and airborne in seconds, punching in the coordinates for Zaris Prime. Arya needed him, whether she knew it or not, and Jake would be damned if he let her face this fight alone. The Hazari Empire's fate hung in the balance. It was time to finish this, once and for all. Jake's fighter screamed through Zaris Prime's atmosphere, the once proud Hazari homeworld, now a seething cauldron of chaos and destruction. Pillars of black smoke rose from the ruined cityscape, the distant thunder of explosions and weapons, fire a constant refrain. He brought the ship down hard in the palace courtyard, leaping from the cockpit before the engines had fully spooled down. Blaster in hand, he sprinted for the grand entrance, his heart pounding in his ears. Inside the palace was a war zone. The rebel forces, clad in dark armor and wielding vicious-looking energy weapons, clashed with the beleaguered Hazari Royal Guard. Jake waded into the fray, his blaster spitting bolts of searing energy, felling rebels left and right. "Where's the princess?" he shouted over the din, grabbing a wounded guard by the collar. The guard coughed, blood flecking his muzzle. "The throne room. She's fighting Crone." He burst into the throne room, a scene of utter devastation. The once grand chamber was a ruin, the walls scorched and pitted, the floor littered with the bodies of the fallen. And there, in the center of it all, was Princess Arya, locked in mortal combat with a towering Hazari warrior. Crone was a monster, easily 7 feet tall and rippling with muscle beneath his battle-scarred armor. He wielded a massive energy blade, the weapon humming and crackling with barely contained power. He bore down on the princess, his eyes alight with feral rage. But Arya was holding her own. She danced around Krone's blows, her own energized claws leaving glowing trails in the air. She was a blur of motion, a golden whirlwind, striking and darting away before the rebel leader could bring his blade to bear. Jake leveled his blaster, looking for a clean shot, but the two were moving too fast, too erratically. He couldn't risk hitting the princess. With a growl of frustration, he holstered his weapon and launched himself at Krone, tackling the massive Hazari around the waist. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, Jake raining blows on Krone's head and torso. But the rebel leader was too strong, too resilient. With a roar, he threw Jake off, sending him skidding across the blood-slick floor. Krone surged to his feet, his energy blade crackling to life once more. He advanced on Jake, a predatory grin splitting his face. "Foolish human. You dare to challenge me? I'll carve you into pieces." Jake scrambled backwards, his hand scrabbling for purchase on the slippery floor. His fingers brushed something, a piece of fallen masonry. He seized it, hurling it at Krone's face with all his strength. The chunk of stone caught the rebel leader square in the forehead, staggering him. Jake leapt to his feet, pressing the attack, hammering at Krone with a flurry of punches and kicks. Suddenly he saw it, a device, some kind of power pack, affixed to the back of Krone's armor. It glowed with an eldritch light, pulsing in time with the rebel leader's movements. That had to be it, the source of his unnatural strength and speed. Jake lunged, his fingers scrabbling for the device. Krone roared, thrashing like a wild animal, but Jake held on, his grip unbreakable. With a final, desperate wrench, he tore the power pack free, sparks and arcs of energy cascading from the ruptured housing. Krone staggered, his strength deserting him in an instant. He collapsed to his knees, his energy blade clattering to the floor. Princess Arya was on him in a flash, her claws tearing into his unprotected flesh, ripping and slashing until the rebel leader lay still, his lifeblood pooling on the marble floor. Arya stood, her chest heaving, her golden fur matted with blood, both alien and her own. Her eyes met Jake's, a look of gratitude and something more passing between them. "The Emperor," she gasped, her voice raw with emotion. "We have to find him." Together they raced through the battle-torn palace, following the trail of destruction to the Emperor's private chambers. They found him there, slumped against the far wall, his once resplendent robes stained crimson. "Father!" Arya cried, rushing to his side. She cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." The Emperor's eyes fluttered open, his gaze focusing on his daughter's face. "Arya," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy. "My brave girl, you've done so well." He reached up, his clawed hand cupping her cheek. "The Empire needs a strong leader, someone who can guide our people through these dark times. It needs you, Arya." The princess shook her head, her shoulders heaving with sobs. "No, father, I can't. I'm not ready." The Emperor smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You are ready, my daughter, more ready than you know. The Hazari need you. They need your strength, your courage, your compassion." With a final shuddering breath, the Emperor's eyes slid closed, his hand falling away from Arya's face. The princess threw back her head and roared, a sound of anguish and grief that echoed through the ruined palace. Jake stood back, his heart aching for her, for the loss and the pain she must be feeling. But he knew deep down that the Emperor was right. Arya was the leader the Hazari needed, the only one who could guide them through the trials to come. The princess rose, her eyes blazing with a newfound determination. She strode from the chamber, her head held high, her steps ringing with purpose. Jake followed, his heart swelling with pride and admiration for this fierce, indomitable woman. In the grand throne room, before the assembled nobles and warriors of the Hazari court, Princess Arya took her place upon the golden throne. The crown, a simple circlet of gleaming metal, was placed upon her brow, and a cheer went up from the gathered throng. Jake watched from the shadows, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Arya would be a great leader, he knew, a beacon of hope and strength for her people. But even as the cheers echoed through the vaulted chamber, a chill ran down Jake's spine. He could feel it, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of perception, a shadow waiting to strike. The fight was far from over, he knew. A new threat was gathering, biding its time, ready to plunge the Hazari Empire into darkness once more. And when it came, Jake would be ready. He would stand beside Arya, his blaster in hand, ready to face whatever horrors the universe could throw at them. Together, they would protect the Hazari, safeguard the innocent, and bring light to the darkest corners of the galaxy. No matter the cost. A deafening roar shook the palace walls as a massive Hazari warship, the HMS Titan, burst through the clouds above Zarus Prime. Its hull gleamed a menacing black, bristling with advanced weaponry. Without warning, lances of searing energy rained down from the ship, obliterating buildings and setting the city ablaze. Jake raced to a nearby terminal, his fingers flying over the controls as he tapped into the Hazari database. His eyes widened in recognition as the ship's schematics flashed across the screen. "Admiral Jar," he spat, his voice tight with anger. "That traitorous bastard, he's working with the rebels." Princess Arya, her face a mask of determination, whirled to face her advisors. "Evacuate the city. Get as many civilians to safety as possible." She turned to Jake, her amber eyes blazing. "We have to stop Zar before he destroys everything we've fought for." Jake nodded grimly, already reaching for his communicator. "I'm calling in reinforcements. Horus, you there?" A burst of static, then the familiar growl of the Hazari captain filled the air. "I'm here, Jake. What's the situation?" A pause, then Horus's voice, filled with a fierce determination. "I'm on my way. Meet you on the Titan." Jake and Arya raced through the palace, dodging falling debris and leaping over smoldering rubble. They burst into the courtyard, where a sleek rebel fighter sat unguarded. Jake leapt into the cockpit, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. "Hang on, Princess," he shouted over the roar of the engines. "This is going to be a bumpy ride." The fighter streaked into the sky, weaving through a hail of anti-aircraft fire from the Titan. Jake gritted his teeth, pushing the craft to its limits as they rocketed towards the warship's hangar bay. They skidded to a halt inside the cavernous bay, leaping from the cockpit with weapons drawn. A squad of Jar's loyal soldiers charged towards them, energy rifles blazing. Jake and Arya dove for cover, returning fire with a fierce intensity. They fought their way through the ship's corridors, a whirlwind of claws and blaster bolts, leaving a trail of fallen enemies in their wake. A familiar roar echoed through the halls as Horus burst onto the scene, his massive frame dwarfing the Hazari soldiers. He waded into the fray, his claws rending armor and flesh with each mighty blow. Together, the trio battled their way to the bridge where Admiral Jar stood waiting, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "Fools," he snarled, his claws flexing. "You're too late. The Titan's weapons are already primed. In moments, Zarus Prime will be nothing but a smoldering ruin, and the Hazari race will be extinct." Arya let out a roar of pure rage, launching herself at the Admiral in a flurry of slashing claws. Their energy blades clashed in a dazzling display of sparks and plasma, the air crackling with the intensity of their duel. Jake and Horus raced to the ship's weapons control panel, their fingers flying over the switches and dials. The countdown to planetary annihilation ticked away on the screen, each second bringing the Hazari homeworld closer to oblivion. With a final desperate effort, Jake slammed his fist down on the override button. The screen went dark, the countdown freezing at mere seconds to spare. The Titan's weapons powered down with a descending whine, the threat of extinction averted. But the battle was far from over. On the bridge, Arya and Jar still fought with a savage intensity, their blades flashing in a deadly dance. The fate of the Hazari Empire hung in the balance, dependent on the outcome of this final, brutal confrontation. On the bridge of the Titan, sparks showered from shattered consoles as Princess Arya and Admiral Jar clashed in a whirlwind of slashing energy blades. The Hazari princess, her golden fur matted with sweat and blood, pushed herself to the brink, matching the traitorous Admiral blow for blow. Jake's fingers flew over the weapons control panel, desperately trying to shut down the Titan's planet-killing arsenal. Horus, his massive frame hunched over the communications array, worked furiously to hack into the rebel fleet's command network. "It's almost there," Jake grunted, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just need to bypass the final firewall and—" The screen flashed green. "Weapons offline!" Jake crowed, slamming his fist on the console in triumph. But Admiral Jar, his face twisted in a snarl of rage, let out a bark of laughter. "Fools, you think you've won?" He pressed a button on his wrist computer, a cruel smirk playing across his scarred muzzle. "I have a surprise for you." A holographic display flickered to life, revealing a vast armada of rebel warships, their hulls bristling with weapons, waiting just outside the Hazari system. "On my command, they will rain fire upon Zarus Prime, reducing your precious homeworld to ashes." Jar snarled, his eyes alight with malice. Horus, his claws flying over the communication controls, suddenly stiffened. "I have an idea." The Hazari captain turned to Jake, his amber eyes intense. "We can use the Titan's comms to send a false message to the rebel fleet. Order them to stand down and surrender." As the two warriors worked to infiltrate the rebel command network, Princess Arya and Admiral Jar fought on, their energy blades clashing in dazzling bursts of plasma. Arya, her body pushed to its limits, lunged forward in a final, desperate attack. Her blade found its mark, piercing Jar's chest. The Admiral staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. But even as he fell, his claws scraped across a flashing red panel on the bulkhead. Terror klaxon blared, warning lights pulsing across the bridge. Self-destruct sequence initiated. A calm mechanical voice announced, "Destruction of the Titan in T-5 minutes." "We have to get out of here," Jake yelled, grabbing Arya's arm. The princess, her strength spent, collapsed against him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Horus scooped up the wounded royal, slinging her over his broad shoulders. "To the escape pods." They raced through the disintegrating ship, dodging exploding conduits and collapsing bulkheads. The escape pod bay loomed ahead, a promise of salvation. They piled into the cramped capsule, strapping themselves in as Jake punched the launch sequence. The pod blasted free from the Titan's hull, rockets flaring as it hurtled into the void. Behind them, the Titan erupted in a blinding flash of light, a miniature supernova that lit up the cosmos. Shockwaves buffeted the tiny escape craft, sending it tumbling end over end. In the pod's confines, Jake and Horus clung to the harnesses, gritting their teeth against the bone-jarring turbulence. Princess Arya, barely conscious, moaned softly, her head lolling against Horus's chest. As the shockwaves subsided and the pod stabilized, the comms crackled to life. "Hazari fleet to escape pod, do you read? Repeat. This is the Hazari fleet." "Acknowledged, Jake Rice. We're picking up your beacon now." A pause, then the voice returned, tight with barely contained excitement. "The rebel fleet, they've surrendered. Their ships are standing down across the system." Jake shot a look at Horus, a grin spreading across his face. "You did it, you crazy cat. Your plan worked." Horus leaned back, his eyes sliding closed in exhaustion. "We did it, Jake. We all did." In the pod's dimness, Princess Arya stirred, her amber eyes fluttering open. "Jake," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Horus, thank you. For everything." Then she slipped back into unconsciousness, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jake reached out, brushing a strand of golden fur from her brow. He looked to Horus, the unlikely ally who had become a true friend through the fire of combat. The Hazari warrior met his gaze, a look of understanding passing between them. As Jake leaned back against the pod's bulkhead, his own eyes growing heavy with fatigue, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The human mercenary and the proud Hazari captain, a friendship forged in the crucible of war, and the brave princess, who had risked everything to save her people. The Hazari medical frigate hummed through the void of space, its gleaming hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Inside the vessel's sterile confines, Jake Rice and Captain Horace lay recovering from their brutal battle aboard the HMS Titan. Jake groaned as he shifted in his hospital bed, his body a patchwork of bandages and regeneration gel. Beside him, Horace fared little better, the proud Hazari warrior's fur matted with blood and seared by energy burns. The door to their room hissed open, admitting a harried-looking Hazari nurse. She rushed to a wall-mounted monitor, her clawed fingers flying over the controls. "Urgent message from Zaris Prime," she said, her voice tight with tension. "It's Princess Aria." "Jake, Horace," Aria said, her voice cracking with emotion. "My people need your help. Zaris Prime is in ruins. Millions are dead, countless more wounded. We can't do this alone." Jake struggled to sit up, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs. "We're on our way, Princess. Just hang on." Horace nodded, his amber eyes blazing with determination. "The Hazari are our brothers, Jake. We won't abandon them in their hour of need." The journey to Zaris Prime was a somber one, the medical frigate's crew working in grim silence to prepare for the monumental task ahead. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Jake and Horace could only stare in horror at the devastation that greeted them. The once vibrant cities of the Hazari homeworld were now little more than rubble and ash, the streets choked with debris and the broken bodies of the fallen. Refugee camps sprawled in the shadow of toppled skyscrapers, teeming with wounded and displaced Hazari. Princess Aria met them at the landing pad, her golden fur dull and matted, her eyes haunted by the horrors she had witnessed. "I've failed them," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My people, I've failed them all." Jake gripped her shoulder, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "You haven't failed anyone, Aria. We're here now. We'll make this right." In the days that followed, Jake and Horace worked tirelessly alongside the Hazari survivors, clearing rubble, erecting shelters, and tending to the wounded. The task seemed insurmountable, the scale of the destruction beyond anything they had ever witnessed. But as they toiled, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Amidst the ruins they found strange technology, devices and weapons unlike anything the Hazari or humans had ever seen. It was Horace who first put the pieces together. "The Vex," he growled, holding up a pulsing, crystalline power core. "These are their machines, their weapons. They've been here, manipulating events from behind the scenes." Jake's blood ran cold as the realization dawned. The Shadow Cartel, the rebel uprising, even the devastating attack on Zaris Prime. It had all been orchestrated by the Vex, a shadowy alien race intent on conquest. "They used the chaos to mask their true intentions," Jake said, his fists clenching. "They're planning something big, Horace, something that could threaten the entire galaxy." The Hazari captain nodded, his eyes hard as flint. "Then we'll stop them, Jake. Whatever it takes, we'll find their stronghold and end this, once and for all." The stronghold of the Vex loomed before them, a twisted mass of alien architecture and pulsing, sickly green light. Jake and Horace, armed to the teeth and clad in battle-scarred armor, exchanged a grim look. "No turning back now," Jake said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. Horace grunted, his claws flexing. "For the Hazari, for the galaxy!" They charged forward, a two-man army against an alien horde. Vex soldiers, their bodies a nightmare fusion of flesh and machine, swarmed to meet them, energy weapons blazing. Jake and Horace fought like men possessed, their weapons spitting death, their armor deflecting the worst of the enemy fire. They pushed deeper into the stronghold, past twisted corridors and pulsing power conduits, toward the heart of the Vex war machine. At last they reached the central chamber, a cavernous space dominated by a towering alien construct. Horace blanched, his eyes widening in horror. "By the gods," he breathed. "It's a gateway, Jake. They're bringing their invasion fleet through." The air shimmered and split, a yawning portal tearing open reality itself. Through the rift, Jake glimpsed the impossible vastness of the Vex armada, countless ships poised to pour through and drown the galaxy in blood. "We have to destroy it," Jake yelled, spraying the construct with plasma fire. but the alien metal absorbed the blasts, unscathed. Beside him, Horus roared in frustration, his claws screeching uselessly against the impenetrable surface. A flicker of movement caught Jake's eye. There, nestled amidst the construct's base, a pulsing crystalline power core, identical to the one they had found on Zarus Prime. They charged forward as one, fighting through the press of Vex defenders. Horus reached the core first, sinking his claws into the glowing heart of the machine. With a roar of fury and exertion, the Hazari heaved, servos straining, sparks flying. The core came free with a shriek of tortured metal, and the gateway flickered and died, the portal collapsing in on itself. The Vex soldiers, suddenly directionless, milled about in confusion. But the victory was short-lived. A hail of energy bolts rained down on their position as hidden Vex snipers opened fire. Horus cried out, staggering, as a bolt punched through his armor and into his chest. "Horus!" Jake screamed, catching the Hazari as he fell. He cradled his friend in his arms, heedless of the enemy fire pinging off his own armor. Jake shook his head fiercely, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "No, Horus, no, you can't die on me, not now. Not after everything we've been through." The Hazari smiled, a weak, pained thing. He reached up, clasping Jake's hand in his own. "You showed me what it means to be a true warrior, Jake Rice. To fight for something greater than myself. Promise me you'll keep fighting. For the Hazari. For the galaxy." "I promise, Horus," Jake choked out, his vision blurring. "I swear it on my life." Horus nodded, his eyes drifting closed. "Then I can rest easy, knowing the galaxy is in good hands." With a final shuddering breath, Captain Horus of the Hazari Imperial Guard passed from the mortal realm, his body going limp in Jake's arms. Jake wept then, great heaving sobs that shook his entire frame. He held Horus close, rocking back and forth, heedless of the battle raging around him. But even in his grief, he knew what he had to do. With infinite care, he laid Horus down, folding the Hazari's claws over his chest in a warrior's salute. Then he rose to his feet, snatching up his fallen plasma rifle. With a roar of anguish and fury, Jake charged into the fray, gunning down Vex soldiers with ruthless efficiency. He fought like a man possessed, driven by the memory of Horus, by the promise he had made. At last the battle was won. The Vex stronghold lying in ruins, the invasion thwarted, but for Jake the victory was ashes in his mouth. He returned to Zarus Prime a hero, but his heart was heavy with the weight of loss. He found Princess Arya in the ruins of her palace, overseeing the rebuilding efforts, her face a mask of stoic determination. When she saw Jake, saw the haunted look in his eyes, the absence of Horus at his side, she knew. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting through the dust and grime. "He died a warrior's death," Jake said softly, his voice raw with emotion. "He died saving the galaxy." Arya nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Then we will honor his sacrifice, Jake Rice. We will rebuild the Hazari Empire stronger than before, and we will stand with humanity as allies and friends to face whatever threats may come." Jake looked out over the ruins of Zarus Prime, at the Hazari people, battered but unbroken, rising from the ashes of their shattered world. In their faces, he saw the same determination, the same indomitable spirit that had burned so brightly in Horus. "I fight on," he whispered, echoing the words of his fallen friend, "for the Hazari, for the galaxy, for Horus." And with that, Jake Rice turned his gaze to the stars, to the battles yet to come, knowing that though the road ahead would be long and hard, he would never walk it alone. For he carried the memory of Horus, the bond of friendship and sacrifice in his heart, a light to guide him through the darkness. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.